The P-38 Lightning didn't just look wild, it flew like a beast and handled like a riddle. With its twin tails and central cockpit, it was a jaw-dropper on the runway. But beauty hides danger. In the skies over Europe, it was called Unforgiving. Yet in the Pacific, it was a kingmaker. Somehow, this complicated machine turned two young men, Richard Bong and Thomas McGuire, into the most lethal aces in American history. How did that happen? What made this nightmare of a plane the ultimate predator in the right hands? Let's dive into the story of the Lightning that shocked the world. The high-speed death trap. The P-38 Lightning looked like it could outrun time itself. Sleek, twin engines, deadly. But when it picked up too much speed, especially during dives, it turned into a coffin with wings. The danger was something pilots came to know all too well: compressibility. It wasn't just a scary word from the manual, it was a silent killer. As the Lightning dove toward enemy fighters or tried to escape danger, pilots often found themselves in a terrifying situation. Near 500 miles per hour, the air around the plane began to behave differently. Shock waves built up over the wings and tail, and suddenly, the controls froze. The elevator, the control that let pilots pull the nose up, stopped working. The plane would lock into a dive, and there was nothing anyone could do. No amount of strength could move the stick. The Earth came rushing up, and many never made it out. Early in the war, no one fully understood why this was happening. The P-38 was fast, but it came with a price. Lockheed engineers finally figured out the fix: dive recovery flaps. These small additions helped restore control by disrupting airflow just enough to give the pilot back their pitch authority. They were installed on later models, like the P-38J, and suddenly pilots had a fighting chance. Still, the fear of a high-speed dive stuck around. Pilots were trained to avoid pushing the plane too hard. The enemy, especially in Europe, learned this weakness and used it. German fighters often tried to bait P-38s into high-speed maneuvers, knowing the odds favored them once the Lightning passed its safe zone. Even after the dive flaps, flying the Lightning remained a test of skill and nerve. You had to know the edge and never cross it. But despite the danger, the P-38's speed was a weapon few could match. It could chase down bombers and outrun pursuers. You just had to respect its limits. The P-38 was never a beginner's plane. It demanded respect, knowledge, and calm under pressure. Push it too far and it would kill you, but master it, and it became one of the deadliest predators in the sky. Two engines, twice the trouble. From the ground, two engines on a fighter looked like a dream. More speed, more power, more safety. But in the cockpit of a P-38 Lightning, those twin engines were a constant balancing act, and one mistake could turn that dream into a disaster. Each Lightning had two Allison V1710 engines, each turbocharged to perform better at high altitudes. It sounded great in theory, but in Europe's cold air, things went wrong fast. The turbo superchargers, essential for high-altitude performance, often overheated or simply failed. The intercoolers, designed to keep things stable, were ineffective in freezing temperatures, causing the fuel-air mixture to ignite prematurely. That led to engine knock, power loss, or full-blown mechanical failure. On top of that, maintenance was a nightmare. These weren't simple power plants. Crews on the ground needed hours just to get one aircraft ready. The Lightning required more hands, more time, and more knowledge than almost any other fighter in the American arsenal. But what really made pilots sweat was what happened when just one engine died in the air. The P-38's engines were spaced far apart, and that created severe asymmetric thrust when one cut out. The aircraft would violently yaw or roll toward the dead engine. If the pilot didn't respond instantly, with rudder, trim, and throttle, they'd spin into the ground. Many did. Flying on one engine wasn't just difficult, it was downright dangerous. Yet, it was also a lifeline. In the Pacific especially, where going down meant landing in shark-infested waters or enemy territory, being able to limp home on one engine saved countless lives. McGuire himself once made it back to base with one smoking engine, battered but alive. That wouldn't have been possible in a single-engine fighter. Pilots learned to adapt. They trained for engine outs, practiced emergency landings, and memorized every checklist. Some even preferred the P-38's redundancy, knowing they had a backup if things went south. But they never forgot how unforgiving the aircraft could be. The P-38's engines gave it reach, power, and a second chance when things went wrong. But they also punished anyone who got lazy. In the Lightning, every flight was a balancing act between confidence and caution. The Pacific awakens the beast. In Europe, the P-38 felt like a misfit, but when the Lightning reached the Pacific, everything changed. What was once considered unstable, unreliable, or too complex suddenly became the perfect tool for the job. And the reason was simple: environment. Europe's freezing skies played havoc on the P-38. Engines struggled with poor intercooling, pilots suffered from frostbite, and the crowded skies full of advanced German fighters made survival tough. But in the Pacific, the weather was warmer, the skies more open, and the threats, while still dangerous, were lighter and less armored. It was the perfect storm, and this time it worked in the Lightning's favor. Japanese planes, like the A6M0, were nimble and agile but poorly protected. One burst from the P-38's central guns could tear them apart. In a turning fight, the Lightning still struggled, but in speed, climb, and firepower, it had the edge. Pilots didn't try to outturn the enemy, they flew high, struck fast, and zoomed away. Boom and zoom became the P-38's war dance. Then there was geography. The Pacific wasn't like Europe. It was vast, scattered with islands, oceans, and distant airfields. Range wasn't just helpful, it was critical, and the P-38 could fly farther than any other American fighter at the time. With drop tanks, it could stretch over 2,000 miles. That allowed it to escort bombers, patrol isolated zones, and carry out strikes far behind enemy lines. Even command structure helped. In the Pacific, pilots like Bong and McGuire weren't locked into tight escort formations. They were given more freedom, allowed to hunt, adapt, and develop their own tactics. They knew their plane's limits and built strategies around its strengths. Instead of fighting against the Lightning's quirks, they made those quirks part of their fighting style. Maintenance crews also had it easier. The warmer climate reduced engine failures and wear. Ground support became more reliable, and turnaround times improved. Everything that made the P-38 a problem child in Europe became manageable or even advantageous in the Pacific. The result? A machine that had nearly been dismissed as too flawed to fly became the top predator of island skies. In the Pacific, the P-38 wasn't a liability, it was a legend. Bong and Mac. Two names tower above all others when it comes to American fighter aces: Richard Bong and Thomas McGuire. Both flew the P-38 Lightning, both rewrote the rulebook on aerial combat, and both proved that even a flawed aircraft in the right hands could become a war-winning weapon. Richard Bong was the quiet killer. He wasn't flashy, didn't chase headlines, but he racked up 40 confirmed kills, the most of any US pilot in history. Bong was all about precision. He knew how to time an approach, lead a target, and use the P-38's center-mounted guns to perfection. No guessing, no convergence angles. Just point and destroy. McGuire, his closest rival and comrade, wasn't far behind. With 38 confirmed kills, he was aggressive, tactical, and fast. Where Bong was calculated, McGuire was reactive, always ready to change strategy mid-fight. Together, they became legends in the Pacific. So why did they love the P-38 when so many others found it difficult to fly? It came down to understanding the machine. Bong and McGuire didn't try to force the Lightning into dogfights it couldn't win. They played to its strengths: high-altitude speed, boom and zoom tactics, and long-range firepower. They treated it like a sniper rifle with wings. The Lightning's concentrated firepower was key. 4 50-caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all packed into the nose, meant zero dispersion. No need to guess where bullets would meet. That made deflection shots easier and deadlier. One pass was often all it took. But it wasn't just the aircraft, it was the pilots. Bong and McGuire trained relentlessly. They learned the quirks, they drilled emergency procedures, they shared tactics with their squadrons. In the hands of rookies, the P-38 could be a death trap. In their hands, it became untouchable. Both men flew solo missions, paired flights, and deep interception runs. They weren't babysitting bombers, they were hunting. They chose the time, the place, and the altitude. And they struck hard. Their kill counts weren't just numbers. They represented a shift in aerial strategy. Bong and McGuire showed that mastery of a difficult aircraft could turn it into an unmatched weapon. The P-38 didn't make them great. They made the P-38 legendary. Range as a weapon. In a war fought across endless stretches of ocean and scattered island chains, range wasn't a luxury, it was survival. And this is where the P-38 Lightning stood alone. No other US fighter early in the war could touch its reach. At its core, the Lightning was a long-range machine. With over 400 gallons of internal fuel and external drop tanks, it could fly well over 2,000 miles. That range changed the game. Suddenly, missions that were previously impossible became routine. Escort bombers to faraway targets? No problem. Intercept incoming enemy formations before they reach the fleet? Done. Strike remote enemy bases deep behind enemy lines? The P-38 could do it. Other American fighters, like the P-40 or early P-51s, simply couldn't go the distance. They were tied to the range of their fuel tanks and needed forward bases close to the action. But the P-38 could leapfrog islands, support long bombing raids, and even relocate between remote airstrips without the need for a carrier or base nearby. This wasn't just a tactical advantage, it was psychological. Japanese pilots never knew where the Lightning might appear. It struck targets they thought were safe. It gave American forces air cover in places that had never seen a fighter before. And it allowed commanders to plan operations with air superiority guaranteed. For pilots, this range also meant more time in the fight. They weren't constantly checking the fuel gauge. They could patrol, loiter, and circle without worrying about ditching in open water. That meant more opportunities for kills and more flexibility in how they approached combat. Bong, McGuire, and countless others used this to their full advantage. They flew high and far, sometimes intercepting enemy bombers hours before they reached the front. They didn't just win dogfights, they prevented them from happening at all. And even when things went wrong, range helped them get home. Hit by flak, lose an engine, the P-38 could still limp back to base while other fighters would have gone down over enemy territory. In the Pacific, range wasn't just a number, it was a weapon. The P-38's ability to reach far, hit hard, and return safely gave it a strategic edge no other plane could match. The platform of precision. If the P-38 Lightning had one superpower, it wasn't speed or armor, it was precision. Every bullet, every shell came from the same place, the nose. Unlike most fighters of the time, which mounted guns on the wings and required convergence tuning, the Lightning focused all its firepower straight ahead. No convergence, no spread, just point and fire. 4 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon were packed tightly into the central nose cone. That meant that at any range, whether 100 feet or 1,000 yards, every bullet traveled along the same deadly path. This made the Lightning a sniper in the sky. In dogfights, this mattered. While wing-mounted guns often missed unless the pilot judged convergence distance perfectly, the P-38 simply had to aim. For skilled pilots like Bong and McGuire, this made all the difference. Deflection shots, where you lead the enemy and fire at an angle, were more effective. They didn't need to spray and pray. One pass was often all it took. And that wasn't the only benefit. The twin-boom layout of the P-38 gave it an unexpected gift: stability. While it rolled slower than single-engine fighters, it yawed less and stayed rock-solid during gun runs. Less vibration, less wobble, more hits. For high-speed firing passes, that stability turned the Lightning into a floating gun platform. Even when diving or pulling out of turns, the guns stayed on target longer. That meant more bullets where they were needed and fewer wasted chances. And when your enemy was fast, nimble, and trying to escape, you didn't get a second try. The Lightning's firepower also packed a punch. The 20mm cannon could shred light bombers and break up formations. The 50 cals were heavy enough to destroy fighters with just a few hits. Together, the salvo was devastating. On paper, the P-38 wasn't always the best dogfighter, but in the hands of a sharp shooter, it was unmatched. Its firepower didn't just look good in specs, it delivered in real combat. When pilots talk about the Lightning, they don't talk about how many rounds it carried. They talk about how often those rounds hit. Because in the P-38, accuracy wasn't just possible. It was built into the design. The P-38 Lightning wasn't perfect, but in the right hands, it rewrote history. It turned flaws into strengths, quirks into victories, and pilots into legends. Bong and McGuire didn't just fly a fighter, they mastered a beast. And in doing so, they proved that greatness isn't about having the best machine, but knowing how to use it. If you enjoyed this dive into aviation history, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.